Hey, I'm Chris Ralph, the professional prospector, and today we're going to talk about how to choose the right prospecting metal detector for you. Now, people ask me, what is the best detector? Well, one of the things I want to say is there is no one perfect detector. There's no one detector to rule them all. That doesn't exist. There's a right detector out there for you, and I'm going to help you today figure out what that is, the best detector for you. We're going to go over 10 important considerations that you need to think about in selecting the right detector for you. Now, if you don't want to be disappointed with the product that you get, if you want to be successful in finding gold, then you'll want to think about these 10 things that I'm going to go over today and kind of mull them over in your mind and then use that information to help you select the detector that will work the best for you. I want to say that I'm not a dealer and I don't sell metal detectors. I don't care what detector you buy. I'm just a guy with 40 years of experience that wants to help you get the best detector that will work the best for you and help you find some gold. This is not a sponsored video. Like I say, there's no manufacturer that even knows that I'm doing this. I'm not planning on telling any of them. They do their own thing and I do mine. And because it's not sponsored and there's nobody telling me what to say, there's nobody saying, hey Chris, push my product. Nope, not going to do that. I'm just going to put in there, I'm going to talk about what I think is best and the things that you need to think about in making a metal detector purchase. Now, metal detectors are something that you can actually find a huge amount of gold with, and I want to show you some examples of some of the gold that I've found over the years. Just a peek at some of the gold I've found.
You really can find quite a bit of gold in just a very short time with a metal detector. I've put up a few photos here of some of the things that I've done. You get over a patch because nuggets tend to occur in groups, and suddenly you're getting nugget after nugget after nugget just because they occur in a group that way.
So let's get going with my 10 important considerations that you need to think about when you are going to maybe purchase a metal detector. Now, the first and probably the biggest issue that most people have is the price. I'm sorry, but detectors that are sensitive enough to be used for gold detecting are not super cheap. And, it's not something that you're going to go out and spend, $20 or even $50. You're not going to get a metal detector that's usable for finding gold with something like that. You need to consider what you want to spend and what your budget is. And of course, I don't know what your budget is. You're going to have to determine that yourself. That's going to be something that you think about. See what you can. And, honestly, I've told this to people a bunch of times when people say they're really expensive. I said, well, maybe you need to save up for a little while. Maybe it's something that you don't just go out and buy on a lark, that you spend some time saving up for so that you can get that really great detector that will help you find some really good gold. A lot of times people will send me comments and that kind of stuff in my videos saying, hey, what about this detector or that one? And almost always, I'll recommend this one or that one. And they'll send me these things and it'll be a link to some super cheap Chinese knockoff thing that, is probably okay for hunting for coins in parks and schools. But we're going to talk about that in just a minute, why you really want a gold-oriented detector if you're going to hunt gold, and a cheap detector for parks and schools for hunting coins is really not such a great idea. We'll talk about that in a second. But anyway, getting back to the price thing, you need to think about the ballpark of what you can afford. And get the best you can afford. Now, it isn't always that the most expensive detector is the best one for you. We're going to think about all these different factors and take a look at that, and I'm going to help you decide what the best one for you is. But I can tell you that always the cheapest super duper, 75 or 80 or even $100 detector, that isn't going to be the right one for you. Now, one of the next big consideration, this is going to be actually our second consideration that you need to take into account after price, is the kind of technology you want to buy. Now, there's two main kinds of technology that's out there that's available for metal detectors that are commonly used to find gold. And that is one, it's called VLF, and the other is called pulse induction. There's actually a third one, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, called zero voltage transmission. But pulse and VLF are the two most common ones. And we'll take a look at that some more. But let me explain to you a little bit about pulse versus VLF. These are the types that most people will buy when they go out and select their detector, or their next detector, or their first detector, for going out and prospecting and finding gold. So the VLF is going to be generally the less expensive one, and it basically, I'm not going to get into the physics of metal detecting because you probably aren't interested in that. But the idea behind VLFs is that they constantly are transmitting a signal into the ground. Their signal actually looks like a sine wave, goes up and down. And what happens is the shorter or the higher the frequency, so if they're going versus going, the higher the frequency, the more sensitive they are to really tiny objects. But the worse their discrimination is. So ones with really super high frequency are some of the detectors that are most sensitive to really tiny gold. And I actually did a video on the most sensitive metal detectors for gold. And I'll put a link to that in the bottom there if you're interested in taking a look at those after this video is over. But I'll get back to it. So there's this VLF, and they're also, the other downside of VLF is that they're more sensitive to mineralization, ground mineralization in the ground. So almost all ground soils have some iron in them, and it just so happens that because gold occurs in mineralized areas, it just so happens that the gold is most common in areas that tend to have a lot of iron in the soil. Now, that's not 100% the time the case, but it is generally true that generally areas that have gold generally are higher on your mineralization scale. The other thing that you can have a problem with mineralization with iron in the soil is what they call hot rocks. And you can get out to certain places, especially in places where there's like a river gravel or stream gravel, and you'll have rocks of different kinds. And your detector will adjust itself to one kind, but then come into contact with a pebble of another kind of rock, and it will actually sound off. And that's your hot rock type of response. A lot of times it'll be that's kind of the sound that it makes. You see kind of go like that. That's the what prospectors call a boing sound that a metal detector will make on a hot rock. But not all hot rocks give clearly that kind of sound. Some of them actually sound pretty good. So VLFs are less expensive. They can be more sensitive to tiny gold. That's a good thing. They are more sensitive also, though, to soil mineralization and hot rocks. So there's kind of a, good and bad. Like I say, there is no one perfect detector to rule them all. There's not one, gold detector. And you'll see toward the end of this video, I'm going to show you some different detectors that I have. And it's like, I don't have just one detector. I have a whole collection of them because they're tools. And sometimes, some applications, this tool is the best. And some applications, that tool is the best. Just like when you're, going out in the garage to work on something, if you're going to cut a piece of wood, well, you want a saw. That's the tool you want. You don't want a hammer to cut a piece of wood with. That wouldn't make any sense. And the metal detectors are almost the same thing. They're more flexible than your hammer versus saw, but you get the point. The point is that detectors are optimized for certain kinds of conditions. So I mentioned the VLF, right? So the next other alternative is what's called a pulse induction, or PI, that type of detector. It's a different kind of technology. Instead of being a continuous wave of energy, basically the pulse induction detector will put out a pulse of energy into the ground, then stop, wait a short period of time. We're talking like milliseconds, not milliseconds, microseconds, 50 or 100 microseconds. It's about stop for a very short period of time and then look for the response in the ground. That short period of time where it switches off and then goes to look, the time frame that it switches off allows it to be way less sensitive to ground mineralization and hot rocks. And so in areas where the hot rocks would just drive you nuts, or the ground mineralization would just drive you nuts using a VLF, you go out there with a pulse induction machine, just right over it. I had a situation a few years back where I was with some other folks in a old gold mine pit in California, and the guy had found a couple little nuggets, but man, the ground was just making so much noise he couldn't, figure out where things were. So I had a pulse induction machine with me, and I went out there and went over, and it's like, oh, you got gold here, you got gold there, you got gold here. And all that ground noise that was just killing him and making it so that he couldn't use his machine, the pulse induction machine just ignored that and sounded off on the gold. And he found some really good gold there. That guy, I think, that morning picked up like better than a quarter of an ounce of gold. So he did pretty good. So pulse induction machines, they tend to be more expensive, right? They are generally less sensitive to really tiny gold, but they do a great job in ignoring soil mineralization and hot rocks. Now, there's different types of detectors that are designed for different purposes. An engineer that's designing a detector, he optimizes the instrument to what he thinks the customer will want. And so there are detectors that are optimized really just for looking for gold nuggets. And there are detectors that are optimized really just for looking for coins and rings and that sort of stuff, like at a park or a school or an old house site or something like that. And there are also machines that are designed to kind of optimize for both. Now, you can say, well, I want a both machine because, well, what happens is the both is a compromise. So it's not the world's greatest coin machine, but it's not the world's greatest gold machine. It's kind of okay for both. Not great, but okay. And that's kind of what you get with these kind of compromise machines. Not that they're bad. They're really good machines. And the truth is, the manufacturers sell an awful lot of those multi-purpose machines because, let's face it, a lot of guys say, hey, I can't afford a collection of detectors like Chris or Ralph has. I can only afford to buy one because they're expensive. So I'm going to get me a multi-purpose machine. It's not a bad choice. And a lot of people will choose to make that choice. It's not a bad choice. But I will tell you sincerely that, and I own multi-purpose machines, that most of the time I'm with a VLF that's designed for finding gold or a pulse induction machine that's for finding gold. Not a kind of compromise that's okay at both. So that's just the tools that I use when I'm out finding gold. But before I get off this topic, I want to say you don't want a coin machine. And I'm going to explain to you why. Because I get a lot of questions about this. What about my old grandpa's coin machine? Or even the new coin machine that I can buy off of eBay or something. Well, here's the thing. Coin machines are optimized for coins and rings and that kind of stuff. Targets that are, full-size bullets and that kind of stuff. If you're hunting relics, that kind of stuff is big. And here's the thing. A coin, say a nickel, this typical coin, it's kind of in the middle, not the biggest coin, it's not the smallest. A nickel is roughly on the order of about a quarter of an ounce nugget. It's roughly the equivalent to a quarter ounce nugget. And if I can tell you that I've found thousands of nuggets over the years with my metal detectors, and I've probably found 50 or 60 nuggets that are a quarter ounce or larger. So what's going to happen is you go to some place with a coin machine and basically you're blowing off all the small gold. You'll functionally be ignoring 90% of the gold in the ground. Coin machines are not optimized for rough ground conditions. They're not optimized to handle really mineralized ground or ground with a lot of hot rocks. Whatever problems you have with those, your coin machine's going to make it worse. And, you know, I don't know. All I can say is if you go out there with a coin machine looking for gold, you're basically blowing off 90% of the gold. You're just ignoring it. So if that's okay with you, okay, it's okay by me. Like I say, I'm not a dealer. I don't care what you buy. It's not a personal thing with me. I'm just trying to give you the right information to help you make the right choice. Okay, so consideration number 4. Okay, we've talked about already about the money, the technology, and the kinds of detectors on the market. That was our first 3. This is number 4. And number 4 is the types of coils that the detector comes with. You see, coils actually make a huge difference in how the detector performs. And there are many gold detectors, a number of them, that either come with more than one coil or they have an optional coil that you can get a second coil. And generally speaking, it is a fact that the larger coils see bigger objects deeper, and the smaller coils see small objects but only shallower. So a big object shallow, a little coil will have no problem seeing it, but a smaller object, down a little deeper, the big coil isn't going to see it. So a lot of times getting the maximum depth doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get maximum gold. Sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, especially if you're in an area with a lot of little gold, hunting with a VLF, because it's more sensitive to small gold, hunting with a VLF with a small coil makes way more sense than another detector with a big coil. You might not get the maximum depth, but it's not always about depth. You're there to find gold, not to penetrate deep into the soil. You're there to find gold. So you want to choose the coil that's going to give you the best gold find. And a lot of times that's the small coil. Some detectors will come with a bigger coil standard. Some detectors will come with a smaller coil standard, and some come with both. And so you get you get a choice. Having a choice is good. Having an accessory coil, if you get only one coil with your machine, having the accessory coil with it, that's a good idea. It gives you more options. Some of the multi-purpose machines, and I'm going to talk to you about those in a minute, come with more than one coil. And really the little coil is what you want to find gold, and the bigger coil is what you want if you're going to go hunting coins and rings and that kind of stuff at parks and schools. So that's how you use the multi-purpose machine. With one coil, it's really more focused one way. With the other coil, it's really more focused the other way. Okay, consideration number 5. I get asked a lot from people, how deep does your detector go? How deep does this detector go? Well, the depth of detection depends a lot on various factors. One of the factors is the size of the target. All right, so a little tiny speck type of gold like these, even with a sensitive detector, you might only get a depth of a half an inch. On the other hand, with really large nuggets, perhaps like this, you might get depths of 18 inches to 2 foot with a really large detector and a large coil. Uh, but it varies. The size of the coil and the size of the target are not the only factors involved in how deep a detector will penetrate into the ground and see a nugget. There's the shape of the nugget is a big factor. How solid the nugget is. If the nugget is really solid, the detector will see it deeper. If it's kind of leafy and wiry, kind of like this, the detector may not see it anywhere nearly as deep. So solid is better than wiry. But you don't get a chance to choose what type of gold is in the ground waiting for you. You have to look for what's there. So the nature of the gold. The other thing is the mineralization in the ground. I mentioned that almost all soil in gold areas has a certain amount of iron, and it varies. Some places it's a lot of iron, some places it's a moderate amount, and then all in between. But with mineralization in the ground, especially with VLFs, that the signal as it's going into the ground from the coil gets eaten up by the iron in the ground. And I'm not using scientific terms, so if you know the science of this, you'll know that I'm doing explanation type work, right? Not a scientific paper. But basically, what happens is the signal from the coil, as it's going through iron soil, gets attenuated. And it's interesting that with the same size coil and really mild ground conditions, a pulse induction machine will see just about the same depth as a VLF. There's no extra depth in really mild soils. Now, if you start having more mineralization, which is normal in most gold districts, then the PI will win because it's going to see deeper. What happens with the VLF is the signal gets weaker and weaker as it goes through the iron. So depth of detection, it depends a lot on the soil too. So shape of nugget, soil, size of coil, size of the nugget, how big it is. All these factors and more actually come into play with determining how deep a detector will see a nugget. So it's not a straightforward answer. You're looking for, 10 inches. There is no answer like that. If somebody tells you, this detector will detect 10 inches, it doesn't even mean anything. It has to, first you have to ask is how deep. And a lot of times they do that in coin machines and they have a standard target like, okay, it'll detect a quarter at 10 inches. And the assumption is mild soil. Okay, quarters are all the same size, all the same shape, and mild soil is mild soil. So you wanted an answer of how deep this detector will go. Honestly, if a dealer tells you how deep it'll go and doesn't qualify it with type of soil and shape of nugget and size of nugget, you probably ought to take that dealer off your list of people to buy from, because they don't know. Either they're not telling you the truth or they don't know how detectors work. Number 6 is the ease of use. Now, especially for new guys, you want a detector that you can pretty much pick up and use without a lot of difficulty. There's enough difficulty in hot rocks and terrain and other things that are out there in the field. You don't want the detector to add to your level of difficulty, right, when you're out prospecting. So ease of use is an important thing. And it's true some detectors are much easier to use than others. Some detectors have an automatic ground balance mode. Now you say, well, I would always run my detector in automatic. How come they don't all have it? Well, you sacrifice something with automatic ground balance. When you have your automatic ground balance on, you're losing a little sensitivity. And so if you want maximum sensitivity, then you turn the ground balance off. But then if the ground changes, you're out of ground balance. So I'm going to do a video on this to explain ground balance in the future, but just know that ease of use is an important factor, especially for new prospectors, and some detectors are easier to use than others. Another thing that you want to consider is what works in your area. Now, maybe you're a member of a prospecting club or you know some experienced prospectors and you could ask them, hey, what do you guys like? When you go out and find gold, what do you like? What detector do you like to use? Because conditions vary. I mentioned that some places are a lot more mineralized than others. And some places, man, they're so mineralized that it's really hard to use a VLF. You almost really need a pulse induction detector. But there are other places that the soil is mild enough you can use a VLF without too much problem. So what's the gold? Where's the gold in your area? Well, how do you get that answered? If you don't know somebody, really the answer is to join a club. And I'm going to tell you more toward the end of this video. I'm going to tell you that what you know as a prospector is what's going to make you more and more successful. It's a skill level, and it's a skill that you have to learn. So talking to experienced folks and getting their input, that's a good thing. You might talk to some of the dealers in the area that you live. If you've got prospecting detector dealers and you can talk to them, well, what do you think is good in this area? They'll tell you. And you know, even in most areas, there's mild areas and more mineralized areas. And if you get a VLF, you just may need to not go to those super heavy mineralized areas just because, you know, they're going to be so mineralized, they're going to give you fits with your VLF. So, it's just a matter of selecting the right area to prospect in. And that's not such a bad thing. Really, it isn't. So consideration number 8. Consideration number 8 is think about maybe buying a used detector. That can save a lot of money. There's a lot of detectors on the market. I'll tell you, the guys that buy them and they don't learn the skills of what it takes to find gold as a prospector. They don't. In fact, a lot of them, they find that they don't even get out and use it much. And after a year or two, they put it up for sale. And if you can find some of those, you might be able to get some really good deals on an almost brand new detector. And where I would look for some of these is some of the prospectors forums. There's a number of them out there. There's actually forums on the internet, and you could just go into Google and look for gold prospecting forum, and you probably get several of them listed on there. And a number of them have equipment for sale kind of listings, and that's where you might look for a detector that you might be able to get a good deal on. So consider the possibility of used detectors as long as they're in good shape. Oh, my one piece of advice on this: never buy a detector that's broken to begin with. If the guy says, yeah, this is a good detector, but I broke it a few years ago and I haven't ever bothered to get it fixed, yeah, that's a really bad sign. If it doesn't work, if you can't show you that it works when you go to buy it, then you shouldn't buy it. Because I've heard of ones where people have purchased detectors and they never worked. They were bad detectors, something wrong. They were broke beyond repair or something like that. So always make sure when you're buying a used one that it's in good condition when you buy it. Number 9 is to buy from a reliable dealer. That's an important thing. Seriously, I have heard horror stories about people buying detectors. I'm not, well, I'll be honest. Here's the thing. The Chinese companies make these detector knockoffs because detectors are expensive. I started out, consideration number 1 is figure what you can afford. Some of these detectors sell for thousands of dollars. And what the Chinese do, because in China there's no copyright laws, so you can copy whatever. You print a book, well, you print that other guy's book. If you can print it and sell it for cheaper than him, well, there you go. And so what they do is they find these expensive detectors, they buy one, and then they make a copy of it. It doesn't necessarily work. It just looks exactly like them. I actually met a guy who spent thousands of dollars buying an expensive detector, but it was a Chinese knockoff. He thought he'd save himself a couple $1,000. He still spent several thousand buying it. It was a detector I think at the time sold for almost $5, and I think he paid $3, so he saved $2,000, right? It never worked. Okay, I took a look at it, and I had a big cell phone at the time. I still do, and I had the thing on, and I rolled the cell phone over the coil, and of course the cell phone has all kinds of metal in it. The frame of the cell phone is all metal, and it should have just screamed overload, loud, blow your ears off kind of a signal. Not a sound. And so if you want a detector that doesn't detect metal, yeah, maybe you should buy a cheap one like that, but I don't think you do. I think you want one that works. And so buy from a reliable dealer. That way you're going to get something. If the dealer won't stand behind his product, if it doesn't work or it's broken or whatever, you know, get something that works and get something from a reliable dealer. That's my consideration number 9. Okay, so number 10 is, if at all possible, get your detector from someone who will give you a lesson or some instruction about how to use it, a demonstration about how to use it out in the field, hopefully out in the field in an area that has nuggets. And so you get a chance to really try it out and see how it is. And so a reputable dealer, and one hopefully that will give you a lesson out in the field, because that's a happy and good thing to have. So that's my 10 considerations, but I'm going to now take a look at some of those things, and we're going to look at some detectors together, and we'll sum up and apply our 10 considerations in making that choice for you. Okay, we've been talking about lots of different kinds of detectors and considerations that you need to go through and think about before you actually make a purchase. Let's take a look at a couple of them. Okay, I've got here the Gold Monster by MindLab, and turn it so that you can kind of see mostly the whole thing. There's the back end and the armrest, and goes like this, and there's the front end with the, you can see I got that's the small coil. Here's the display that you get, and there's various settings. I'm not going to try and teach you how to use it. I'll do a separate video one of these days on setting up the Gold Monster to find gold. But the Gold Monster is comparatively, not super expensive, but a detector that's very sensitive and optimized for finding gold. It's a great detector. I use mine quite a bit. Another detector in the same category, which is the category of high frequency VLFs. The Gold Monster's one, but another one is the Goldbug 2 by Fisher. I've got this one shortens down more easily. I've got a cover over the case on mine just for protecting it. Anyway, this is also a very sensitive detector. It's the highest frequency detector that for regular detecting across the ground that you can buy. There is some little like probe type detectors that are not really made for covering ground. Anyway, this is a great detector and another choice in that high frequency VLF kind of market. And as you can see, I have the small coil on this one too, just as I had the small coil on the Gold Monster, because small coil is where you want to be for finding small gold. And with this high frequency, that's what this type of detector is optimized for. So those were some high frequency VLFs. And I just actually did a whole video on the most sensitive metal detectors. And I talked about a number of them and showed some of them. And if you're thinking about that kind of option, you should watch that video. I'll put a link to it in the description, but it's a good detector that you should seriously consider. Now, the next category that we have that I want to talk about is what I call the multi-purpose VLF. And this is the Fisher Goldbug Pro, and different from the Goldbug 2. All right, totally different detector. Doesn't, other than the handle, really doesn't look similar at all. But anyway, the control panel is here. You can see that I have the small coil on it, and I use this for finding gold. I actually did a whole video on the most sensitive metal detector out there. Or not, I'm sorry, not the most sensitive. The lowest cost VLF that's out there that's sensitive enough to find gold. And that actually is this detector. If you want to learn more about the Goldbug Pro, take a look at that other video that I did. It's a good solid detector and relatively low in price. And with the small coil, it's good enough for gold. And with a big coil, it's not too bad for hunting coins and relics at parks and schools. Another detector that I have and use is White's MXT, my White's detector, and I use this. You can see that I have a bigger coil on it. I have a much larger coil, and that's because I do use this for hunting coins and that kind of stuff at parks and schools. This is my preferred detector for that kind of application. So the next entry in my detector collection is the SDC 2300 by Minelab. This is a pulse induction machine, and it has basically a fixed coil, although there are some aftermarket makers who make different coils for this. It really is not so much intended to have interchangeable coils. But this is a pulse induction machine. It offers excellent resistance to hot rocks and mineralized soil. So it's what I choose to use in areas that have highly mineralized ground and lots of hot rocks. The coil that it has is an 8-inch monotype coil, and this detector is actually pretty darn sensitive. It's not as sensitive as the high frequency VLFs, but it's in the ballpark of sensitivity with the multipurpose type VLFs. I don't know that it'll equal every multipurpose VLF, but it will equal a lot of them. And it's a detector that I use quite a bit. It's good for pinpointing. So, if you have a moderate amount of trash, this is not a bad detector. You're going to dig trash because you can't tell the difference between trash and gold or trash and non-ferrous targets. But still, this is a good detector that I use quite frequently in a number of places in both California and Nevada. Finally, for showing off detectors, I have this. This is Minelab's GPZ 7000. This is pretty much the most expensive detector on the market. You can see it has a really big coil. This is my big coil detector for if I want to see things deep. It has amazing sensitivity to small gold for a detector with a big giant coil like this. It really is an excellent detector. It does pretty good on mineralized soil and ground conditions. But like I say, it is the most expensive metal detector for gold on the market that you can buy, easily enough. That's pretty common. It's not custom or anything. But anyway, a great detector. Another option if you're looking for gold and kind of money's no object. There are some people out there. It's not me, but there are people like that. And in fact, if you think that coil is big, well, I've got this coil for the same detector. It's humongous. So there are ways of finding things that are down deep, and having a big coil, at least as an option, it's a great tool. And I like my GPZ 7000. It's something I use frequently and have found some really amazing gold with it. So that's our kind of going through and showing some of the different kinds of technology. Of course, there are other makers that make products in these categories. Garrett makes the AT Gold, which is a multi-purpose kind of machine. There are other people that make, like I say, the multi-purpose machines are real popular because a lot of guys are interested in looking for gold, but they also want to find coins and rings and that kind of stuff. So they choose a compromise machine. They're not bad. They're not bad, really. I use mine too sometimes. They're great. So that's my display of detectors. So let's talk about some final things and sum this up. I've listed off 10 things that I think are important considerations, and I want you to think about those carefully before you buy any detector. You might even watch this video a second time just to maybe pick up on a few points that you might have missed. In addition to having a great detector, you also need to know what you're doing to find gold. It's just not the tool. A great pipe wrench or a A good saw doesn't make a carpenter, a pipe wrench doesn't make a plumber, a voltmeter doesn't make somebody an electrician. It's the skill and knowledge that those trade guys have to be able to do their trade. And prospecting is the same thing. What you know makes a huge difference. And I wrote a book called Fistful of Gold. And I'm just showing this to you right now. This is an encyclopedia full of information, and it's just got gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of material on how to find gold. The point of the book is to help you find fistful of gold. So I think you ought to take a look at this. You might even try buying this before you buy your detector, because you'll learn a lot in the pages of the book. I also have a website. It's called Nevada Outback Gems, that has all kinds of stuff. It has a bunch of material that I couldn't put in my book, so because the book is long enough already. And so it has all this other material and a lot of good information. You might take a look at the website too. And then, of course, obviously, you're watching it. I have YouTube videos. So I have quite a few of them now. This is, I think, the 64th video that I've got out there. And I've got plans to do a whole lot more in the coming year. So, stay tuned. Take a look at some of my other videos. You might go on to my page and scroll down and see if there's any topics of interest on YouTube that you might want to pick up, because I've got a lot of videos about metal detecting, about different kinds of metal detectors, about tips and techniques for when you're out in the field with your metal detector finding gold. So I got a lot of information about gold on my website, or I'm sorry, on my YouTube channel, and you really should probably take a look at some of those. And if you're interested in seeing more in the future, be sure to subscribe. So the more you learn about finding gold, the more successful you're going to be, and the more enjoyment you're going to have when you get out there to look for gold. Remember that prospecting is a skill. Like I say, like a trade skill, a plumber or electrician. You learn how to prospect and find gold, and you're going to be way more successful once you get that experience over when you're brand new. So anything when you're new to bring yourself more experience and more knowledge is going to help you. Remember that when you're thinking about going out to find gold. I've got a lot more videos coming up, including a series that I'm doing. In fact, this is the first one in the series of videos to help new guys or inexperienced guys or guys that are just learning how to find more gold. I'm going to have a video on finding your first nugget with a metal detector. So we've got a lot of good stuff planned. So like I say, subscribe and hang around, and you're going to see some great videos in the future from me. And if you're interested in gold, this is the place to be.